The crystal chandelier swayed as Kang Jae-hyun's hand gripped the champagne flute, his knuckles white against the delicate glass. Across the ballroom, a woman in crimson silk was making her way toward him, her eyes locked on his with the precision of a predator who'd found wounded prey. She didn't know that the elegant black woman standing beside him, the one she'd dismissed with a single glance, was about to become her worst nightmare. The Seoul Grand Hotel ballroom glittered with old money and new ambition. South Korea's elite had gathered for the annual Winter Charity Gala, where million-dollar donations were pledged over caviar and carefully crafted alliances were sealed with handshakes worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. But tonight, the whispers weren't about the 12 million won raised for children's hospitals. They were about the man who'd just walked in. Kang Jae-hyun moved through the crowd like water through stone, his presence parting the sea of designer, gowns and tailored suits. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd never needed to raise his voice to be heard. His dark suit was understated, expensive in a way that only those who understood true wealth could recognize. But it was the woman beside him who drew the stares. Zuri Adeyemi stood at his side, with the kind of calm that made people uncomfortable. She was tall, her dark skin luminous against the ivory silk of her gown, her natural hair styled in an elegant updo that showcased the sharp angles of her face. She didn't smile at the curious glances. She didn't need to. Everything about her presence suggested she belonged exactly where she was, even as the whispers tried to figure out why. "Is that his translator?" someone murmured near the champagne fountain. "Foreign investor, probably," another voice suggested. "He's been expanding into African markets." "She's beautiful, but she seems so detached." Ja-hyun heard none of it, or perhaps he simply didn't care. He'd learned long ago that people would always talk. Let them. Their opinions had never built his empire, and they certainly wouldn't tear it down. Zuri touched his arm lightly, a gesture so subtle most wouldn't notice. But Jae-hyun felt it, understood the silent communication they'd perfected over 8 years of marriage. Someone interesting had caught her attention. He followed her gaze to a woman in red, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Han Soo-min had been watching him since he'd arrived. She'd done her research, of course. Kang Jae-hyun, CEO of 3 legitimate corporations that masked the real source of his power. Unmarried, according to every public record. Untouchable, according to every woman who'd tried. But Soo-min had never met a man she couldn't charm, and she'd never met a challenge she didn't accept. She adjusted her dress, a crimson sheath that cost more than her car, and began her approach. The black woman beside him was clearly some kind of employee, pretty enough, but obviously not Korean, and therefore not a real threat. Soo-min had seen this before, powerful men who kept exotic companions for appearances at international events. This would be easier than she thought. "Mr. Kang," Soo-min purred as she reached them, her voice pitched perfectly between professional and promising. "I've been hoping to meet you all evening." Jae-hyun turned to her with the expression of someone encountering a mildly interesting painting. "Have you?" It wasn't a question, but Soo-min treated it like an invitation. "I'm Han Soo-min. My family does import-export with Southeast Asia. I think we could have much to discuss about expansion opportunities." "I'm sure we could," Jae-hyun said, his tone giving away nothing. Soo-min's smile widened. She'd expected more resistance. This was going better than planned. She took a half-step closer, invading the space that most people instinctively respected around him. "I've heard so much about your business acumen. They say you can spot a valuable opportunity from a mile away." "Do they?" Again, not a question. Zuri took a sip of her champagne, her dark eyes tracking every micro-expression on Soo-min's face. She'd seen this performance before, in different cities, different languages, but always the same script. The ambitious woman, the powerful man. The assumption that she, Zuri, was decorative rather than dangerous. It never got old, watching people underestimate her. "I'm sorry," Su-min said, finally acknowledging Zuri's presence with the kind of dismissive politeness that was actually quite rude. "I didn't catch your name." "I didn't offer it," Zuri replied, her accented Korean perfectly clear, each word carefully chosen. Su-min's smile faltered for just a moment before recovering. "Well, I'm sure you understand that Mr. Kang and I have business to discuss. Perhaps you could give us a moment?" The temperature in their small circle seemed to drop. Across the ballroom, a waiter actually paused mid-pour, sensing something shift in the atmosphere. Jae-hyun's expression remained neutral, but his eyes had gone cold. "I don't recall asking for privacy." "Of course not," Su-min said quickly, recalibrating. She'd pushed too fast, but she could recover this. She always recovered. "I simply thought your companion might be more comfortable mingling elsewhere. These events can be so tedious when you don't know anyone." "Can they?" Jae-hyun said, and this time there was definitely something dangerous in his tone. But Su-min was committed now, and commitment had always been her strength. She'd clawed her way from a middle-class family in Busan to Seoul's elite social circles through sheer determination and the strategic deployment of her considerable charms. She wasn't about to be deterred by one cold response. She touched Jae-hyun's arm, her fingers light against his sleeve. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere. Quieter? I have a proposal that might interest you." Zuri's eyes flickered to where Su-min's hand rested on her husband's arm. She didn't move, didn't speak, simply observed, filing away every detail for later consideration. Jae-hyun looked down at the hand on his arm, then back up at Su-min. "A proposal." "A mutually beneficial arrangement," Su-min clarified, her voice dropping to something more intimate. "I think you'll find I can be very helpful to the right partners." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Around them, the party continued, but their small drama had begun to draw subtle attention. Seoul's social elite possessed a sixth sense for scandal, and several conversations had slowed, ears tuning in while eyes remained carefully averted. Zuri remembered the first time she'd stood in a room like this 8 years ago, when everything had been different. She'd been 26, newly arrived in Seoul to manage her father's shipping investments, completely unprepared for the labyrinth of Korean business culture and the even more complicated underworld that lurked beneath it. Her father had sent her believing the Korean market was ready for African partnerships. He'd been right about the market, wrong about the welcome. The night she'd met Jae-hyun, she'd been cornered at a business dinner by 3 men who'd made it clear that foreign women, especially black women, weren't wanted in their negotiations. They'd been drunk enough to be bold, sober enough to be dangerous. Jae-hyun had appeared like smoke, his presence scattering them before he'd said a single word. "You're out of your depth," he'd told her afterward, his English accented but precise. "This world eats people like you." "People like me?" she'd challenged, angry at the assumption. "Honest people," he'd clarified. "People who think rules matter." She should have walked away. Instead, she'd said, "Then teach me to swim." And he had. Not because he'd wanted something from her, but because he'd recognized something in her that he'd lost in himself, a kind of stubborn integrity that refused to bend. Over months of careful conversation, they'd built something unexpected. Trust. Understanding. Eventually, love, though neither had used the word for a long time. She'd taught him that there were different kinds of strength. He'd taught her that survival sometimes required silence. Their marriage had been private, witnessed by only 3 people. Jae-hyun had explained that in his world, loved ones were targets. If no one knew she was his wife, no one could use her against him. Zuri had understood. She'd also understood that this meant living in shadows, being dismissed, underestimated, invisible. She'd become very good at being invisible. Back in the present, Soo-min was still talking, her hand still on Jae-hyun's arm, her confidence growing with each passing second. He didn't reject her outright. "I'm staying at the hotel," Soo-min said, her meaning crystal clear. "Room 2847. If you'd like to discuss this proposal in private, I'll be available after the gala." Jae-hyun's expression remained unreadable. How generous. Soo-min took this as encouragement. She leaned in closer, her voice a whisper, meant only for him, though Zuri heard every word. "I know what powerful men need, Mr. Kang, and I know how to be discreet." "Discretion is valuable," Jae-hyun agreed. Emboldened, Soo-min finally turned her full attention to Zuri. "I'm sure you understand that Mr. Kang and I need to discuss business. Perhaps you could entertain yourself elsewhere for the rest of the evening." Zuri met her gaze with eyes that held no anger, no jealousy, nothing but a calm assessment that made Soo-min inexplicably uncomfortable. "I'm quite entertained where I am," Zuri said softly. Soo-min's smile turned sharp. "I'm not sure you understand your position here." "My position." Zuri repeated the words as if tasting them. "Please, enlighten me." "Look," Soo-min said, her patience wearing thin. "I don't know what your arrangement is with Mr. Kang, and frankly, I don't care. But this is Seoul, not wherever you're from. There are hierarchies here, expectations, and right now, you're in the way." The ballroom had gone noticeably quieter. Dozens of conversations continued, but the attention was focused on their small group, waiting for the explosion everyone could sense building. Jae-hyun sipped his champagne, his expression almost bored. But those who knew him, really knew him, would have recognized the stillness that came before the storm. Zuri set down her glass with precise care. "In the way of what, exactly?" "Of opportunity," Soo-min said bluntly. "I'm offering Mr. Kang something valuable. You're just decoration." The word landed like a slap. Zuri smiled then, a small curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "Decoration?" "I don't mean to be rude," Soo-min said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But you must know that men like Mr. Kang, they appreciate beautiful things from exotic places. That doesn't mean those things have real value in our world." "Our world," Zuri echoed. "Korean society," Soo-min clarified. "This is our culture, our business structure, our rules. You're a guest here at best. It's nothing personal, just reality." Jae-hyun finally moved, a subtle shift that drew every eye. He didn't touch Soo-min, didn't raise his voice, but when he spoke, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. "Tell me more about these rules," he said quietly. "I'm fascinated by your understanding of them." Soo-min, misreading his tone entirely, beamed. "Well, for one, loyalty is everything in our culture. Knowing your place, respecting hierarchy, understanding that some people are simply more important than others." "Some people," Jae-hyun repeated. "Yes," Soo-min said eagerly. "Korean people understand this instinctively. But foreigners, they often don't grasp the subtleties. They think they can just walk into our world and demand equal treatment." Zuri's expression remained serene, but her eyes had gone very still. Soo-min, sensing victory, pressed on. "I'm not saying this to be cruel, truly, but someone should explain to your companion that she's embarrassing herself by trying to compete where she doesn't belong." "Compete," Zuri said softly. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "What else would you call it?" Soo-min laughed, a brittle sound. "Clinging to a man who's clearly interested in more suitable company. It's pathetic." The word hung in the air like poison. Jae-hyun set down his glass. The small sound of crystal touching marble might as well have been a gunshot. Around the ballroom, conversation stopped entirely. Everyone was watching now, pretense abandoned. "Ms. Han," Jae-hyun said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "I'm curious about something." Su Min turned to him, triumph written across her features. Yes? In your research about me, what exactly did you learn? That you're one of the most powerful men in Seoul, Su Min said immediately. That you control interests across multiple industries. That you're unmarried and very selective about your associates. Unmarried, Jae-hyun repeated. According to what source? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Su Min's face. Every public record, every article. There's never been any mention of a wife or a romantic partner. No, Jae-hyun agreed. There hasn't been, has there? The uncertainty bloomed into confusion. I don't understand. Zuri made a small gesture, barely more than a movement of her fingers. Across the ballroom, two men in dark suits began moving through the crowd. They didn't hurry. They didn't need to. Ms. Han, Jae-hyun continued, you've made several interesting assumptions tonight. Would you like to know which one was the most costly? Su Min's confidence was crumbling now, replaced by the dawning awareness that she'd miscalculated badly. I don't. You assumed that invisibility equals insignificance, Jae-hyun said. You saw someone who didn't fit your understanding of power and decided they had none. He turned to Zuri, and his entire demeanor shifted. The cold businessman vanished, replaced by something warmer, something real. He extended his hand to her, a gesture of invitation and respect. Zuri took it, rising from her position beside him to stand slightly forward. Suddenly, she was the center of gravity in their small constellation, and Jae-hyun had become the one orbiting. This is Zuri Adeyemi Kang, Jae-hyun said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. My wife of 8 years. The reason there's no public record of our marriage is because I value her life more than I value transparency. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Su Min had gone pale. Your wife. My wife, Jae-hyun confirmed. My partner. The person who has built half of everything you admired about my empire. Zuri smiled, still serene, still calm. Hello, Ms. Han. Now that we've been properly introduced, shall we discuss those rules you mentioned? I didn't know, Su Min stammered. No, Zuri agreed. You didn't. You saw a black woman standing beside a Korean man and made assumptions. You saw someone quiet and decided they were weak. You saw someone smiling and thought they were harmless. She took a step forward, and despite her gentle tone, Su Min retreated. Let me teach you something about power, Zuri continued. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. Real power is what happens when everyone in this room just realized that the woman they've been dismissing for the past hour is the reason 3 of their biggest deals went through last quarter. Around the ballroom, several faces had gone very pale indeed. Zuri's work in the shadows had touched more lives than most realized. You talked about loyalty, Zuri said, about hierarchy, about knowing your place, so let me help you find yours. She made another small gesture. The 2 men in suits had reached the edge of their group now. They didn't touch Su Min, didn't threaten her. They simply stood there, a silent presence that spoke volumes. Mr. Kim, Zuri said to one of them, her tone conversational. Ms. Han mentioned she has family in import-export with Southeast Asia. Would you happen to know which company? Mr. Kim's smile was professional and terrifying. Han Trading Corporation, ma'am. They rely heavily on shipping routes managed by Adeyemi Global. Ah, Zuri said. My father's company. How interesting. Su Min's eyes widened with the realization of just how catastrophically she'd failed. And Ms. Han mentioned she's staying at this hotel, Zuri continued. Mr. Park, who owns the Seoul Grand? The Kang Group, ma'am, Mr. Park replied, through your husband's holdings. Zuri turned back to Su Min. So you've propositioned my husband in a hotel we own, threatened a woman whose father controls your family's shipping, routes, and insulted me in front of everyone who matters in Seoul society. Have I summarized correctly? Soo-min opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Here's what's going to happen," Zuri said, her voice still gentle, still calm, which made it all the more frightening. "You're going to leave this gala quietly. You're going to go home and think very carefully about the choices you've made tonight. And then you're going to decide what kind of person you want to be." "I'm sorry," Soo-min whispered. "I didn't mean. I didn't know." "Yes," Zuri said. "That's the problem. You didn't know because you didn't look. You saw what you expected to see and acted accordingly. That's not ambition, Ms. Han. That's laziness." Jae-hyun spoke for the first time in several minutes. "We're not going to destroy your family's business. We're not going to blacklist you from Seoul society. We're not going to do anything at all." Soo-min looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "We don't need to," Jae-hyun continued. "Everyone in this room just watched you make a fool of yourself. Everyone in this room just learned that you're the kind of person who insults a man's wife to his face because you assumed she didn't matter. Your reputation will take care of itself." And he was right. Around the ballroom, people were already turning away, conversations resuming, but with a new edge. Soo-min's name would be whispered now, but not with envy. With warning. Mr. Kim stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am, shall I escort Ms. Han to her room?" Zuri considered. "No. Ms. Han can find her own way. She's very good at knowing where she belongs, remember." Soo-min stood frozen for another moment, the full weight of her humiliation settling over her. Then, with whatever dignity she could salvage, she turned and walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for her, but not with respect, with pity. As she disappeared through the gilded doors, Zuri turned to her husband. "That was entertaining." "Was it?" Jae-hyun's mouth quirked. "I thought it was rather sad." "Both things can be true." They moved back into the party as if nothing had happened, but everything had changed. People approached Zuri now, properly introduced themselves, showed her the respect they should have offered from the beginning. She accepted it all with grace, knowing that fear and respect often looked the same in ballrooms like this. An hour later, when they were finally alone in the car heading home, Jae-hyun took her hand. "You could have ended her." "I could have," Zuri agreed, "but I didn't need to. She ended herself." "Still," he said, "the way you handled it, you're terrifying, you know that." Zuri laughed, the first genuine laugh of the evening. "Says the Mafia Boss." "I threaten people with guns," Jae-hyun said. "You threaten them with consequences and make them apologize for it. That's much scarier." "I learned from the best," Zuri said, squeezing his hand. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the lights of Seoul streaming past their windows. Jae-hyun was the one who finally spoke again. "Do you ever regret it? The invisibility?" Zuri considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. It would be easier if people knew from the start. But then I remember that invisibility is a kind of power, too. People show you who they really are when they think you don't matter. And tonight? Tonight, Ms. Han showed us exactly who she is. Ambitious without strategy, bold without intelligence, confident without cause. She's not the only one," Jae-hyun said quietly. "There will be others." "I know," Zuri said. "There always are. But that's fine. Let them come. Let them make their assumptions. Every person who underestimates me is a person who's already lost." 3 days later, the fallout from the gala continued to ripple through Seoul's elite circles. Han Soo-min's sponsors had quietly withdrawn their support. Invitations to exclusive events had stopped arriving. Her family's business hadn't been directly targeted, but somehow their shipping contracts had become more complicated, their routes less efficient. Nothing could be traced back to the Kangs. Nothing ever could. Soo-min sat in her apartment, staring at her phone, watching her social media following drop by the hundreds. Someone had leaked what happened at the gala, not the full story, just enough. Just the fact that she'd tried to seduce a married man by insulting his wife. In Seoul's social hierarchy, there were recoverable mistakes. This wasn't one of them. Her mother called. "What did you do?" Soo-min couldn't answer. What could she say? That she'd been so blinded by ambition she'd forgotten to see clearly? That she'd assumed power looked a certain way and dismissed everything that didn't fit the pattern? That she'd confused silence for weakness, and it had cost her everything? Meanwhile, in the Kong residence, Zuri sat in her study, reviewing shipping manifests and trade agreements. This was her real work, the invisible labor that kept empires running while others claimed the glory. She didn't mind. Power that needed recognition wasn't power at all. Jae-hyun appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of tea in hand. "Still working?" "Almost done," Zuri said, accepting the tea with a smile. "How was your meeting?" "Productive. Several people wanted to apologize for the gala. They weren't the ones who insulted me. No, but they're afraid they might have been. Or that they could be next." Jae-hyun settled into the chair across from her. "You've made people nervous." "Good," Zuri said. "Nervous people pay attention. Is that what you want?" "Attention?" Zuri thought about it. Really thought about it. "No. But I want respect. I want people to understand that quiet doesn't mean powerless, and different doesn't mean less." "They're learning," Jae-hyun said. "Slowly. But they're learning." "Some of them," Zuri corrected. "Others will need more lessons. And you'll teach them." "If I have to." She set down her tea. "You know what the saddest part of that night was? She could have been powerful. Ms. Han was ambitious, bold, willing to take risks. Those are good qualities. But she wasted them on shortcuts and assumptions." "She wanted what you have," Jae-hyun observed. "No," Zuri corrected. "She wanted what she thought I have. The surface, the appearance. She saw a powerful man and wanted to possess him like a trophy. She never saw the partnership, the work, the years of building trust and understanding. She wanted the throne without earning the crown." "Not everyone can do what you've done," Jae-hyun said. "Building power from nothing, in a foreign country, in a world that didn't want you." "Everyone could," Zuri disagreed. "They just have to be willing to be invisible first, to learn, to listen, to wait for the right moment instead of forcing the wrong one." Jae-hyun smiled. "You're very wise for someone who's only 34. "I'm very wise for someone who's survived. 8 years married to you," Zuri shot back, grinning. They finished their tea in comfortable silence, partners in all things, visible and invisible alike. The story of what happened at the Winter Charity Gala would become legend in Seoul's elite circles. Versions of it would be told and retold, each iteration slightly different, but the lesson always the same. Be careful who you underestimate. Be careful what you assume. Be careful of the quiet ones, because the most dangerous woman in the room is the one you never saw coming. And by the time you realize she was there all along, she's already won. Zuri Adeyemi Kang had learned to be invisible, but invisibility, as Han Soo-min discovered too late, was just another word for underestimated. And in a world where perception was power, being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. The quiet ones always win in the end. They have to. No one's watching them carefully enough to stop them. If you enjoyed this story of quiet power and strategic patience, hit that subscribe button to see more tales of people who changed everything without raising their voice. Drop a comment below telling us about a time someone underestimated you, and don't forget to like this video. The most dangerous stories are the ones people don't see coming, just like Zuri. Thanks for watching, and remember, in any room, the person who seems to matter least might actually be running everything. See you in the next story.